I just got some exam results back. Can't wait to really dig in and see what I got. Damn it, I failed all of them. Even the final to introduction to passing exams. Well, when I feel like I pretty much disappointed everybody in my life, I turn to self-help books like a loser. These things are written by big-name celebrities to really drill the myth into your head that they're human too. This one just so happens to be things to compare yourself when you're feeling down. Look at the first page, and oh, won't you look at that? It just says the Gizmondo. Making a game console takes a lot of things like time, energy, blood, sweat, tears, but all of that effort isn't worth it when you make some shit like the Hyperscan. Not all consoles are destined to succeed. Everyone is a f*** up sometimes. You go up against the big three with something like the Ouya, and yeah, you're gonna get laughed at. Let's take a look at some consoles that didn't do well. Like, at all. We're not going to mention hardware add-ons like the Sega 32X and the N64DD, or console variations like the PSX, a DVR version of the PS2 that didn't do well, because at the end of the day, it's still a PS2, the best-selling console of all time. Strictly consoles here. If it's not its own thing, it doesn't deserve to be on this list. For being one of the most well-known and historically important video game companies out there, Atari only had two consoles that did well. Obviously the 2600, but also the 7800, which was a competitor to the NES. The Atari 5200, Lynx, and the Jaguar were all total failures. The 5200 had a weird controller and was just a souped-up 2600, so much so that titles on the 5200 were all just more enhanced versions of games you can already play on the 2600. It only sold a little over 1 million units before being discontinued in just 2 years, lasting from 1982 to 1984. Could be because of the Great Crash of '83, or because it's just a bad console. The Lynx was Atari's answer to the ever-popular Nintendo Game Boy, and that's exactly what killed it. Unlike the 5200, the Lynx was actually really well received, being a pretty decent and advanced handheld console. However, not only was it going up against the hottest handheld at the time, but was also $90 more than the Game Boy and just didn't hold up. The Lynx lasted from 1989 to 1995 and sold 3 million units, being a commercial failure despite critical acclaim. While it wasn't a huge fail on Atari, the Lynx trailed behind the Game Gear, selling 7 million less units, and both the Game Gear and Lynx sales combined didn't hold a candle to the Game Boy's success. Finally, the Jaguar was pretty much the same as the 5200, being not a great console. Releasing in 1993 and being discontinued in 1996, the Jaguar had bad games, rushed releases, and looked pretty weak next to the Sega Saturn, and especially the PlayStation, both of which released here in North America 2 years later in 1995. Atari pretty much lied about the Jaguar being 64-bit, only containing two 32-bit processors. During a time where the only other consoles were the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis, both only a mere 16-bit, Atari urged customers to do the math, and wouldn't you look at that, 100,000 plus 50,000 equals the Jaguar sales numbers. This thing pissed out. The Apple Bandai Pippin was a console developed by Apple and manufactured by Bandai. It lasted from 1996 to 1997. It was $600 at launch, over $1,000 in today's money. To put that in perspective, the PlayStation was $300 and the N64 was $200. By the time it came out, the N64 and the PlayStation were already dominating the market. The Pippin was based on the Macintosh platform, basically being a macOS video game console. What this system did have, which was big at the time, was the lack of region locking. Not only was every Pippin compatible with games of all regions, but it could be hooked up to any TV in the world, supporting both PAL and NTSC standards. And if you were part of the anti-TV pro computer monitor revolution, well, the Pippin also supported just plugging it into a monitor. However, the thing ran horribly, had a jank controller, and the few games that were made for it, well, they didn't vary in quality, but that isn't a positive on the Pippin. The game that was considered its system seller was a terrible Power Rangers game. The system only sold 42,000 units. How fortunate. The Gizmondo from Tiger Telematics was a console trying to compete against the Nintendo DS and the PlayStation Portable. This thing failed way past big time. Not only were 14 games ever released for the thing, but it only lasted 11 months before being completely discontinued. Technical-wise, the screen was small, the battery life was short, and the base model that cost $230 in 2005 was absolutely caked with advertisements. Looks like someone's incapable of doing research. Yeah, so the service that would have hosted these ads was called Smart Ads, and there was a Smart Ads enabled Gizmondo for $230 and a Smart Ads disabled Gizmondo for $400. The service never released, so the people who bought the $230 Gizmondo never had to experience the ads. However, that doesn't disqualify the fact that this service is just really weird to even be in planning stages. Like, imagine paying $230 for a video game console that still has ads. But disregard everything I say past this point about this console having ads, because it never did. The service never came out.
For the one without ads, that set you back $400, which the DS was only $150 and the PSP was $250, and most home consoles at the time were less than $400. While the PSP was slightly more expensive than the base Gizmondo, I mean, it was a way better console, having a way bigger and better library, as well as, having no ads. The Gizmondo sold less than 25,000 units, primarily because the only way to buy Gizmondos, especially in the United States, was through specific kiosks in a small number of malls. Out of the 14 titles released for the device, the best-selling one was Sticky Balls. Also, the executives behind this thing were wrapped up in a little thing called the Swedish Mafia. Oops. Looking at another handheld system, we got Nokia's N-Gage, a console that tried to be a phone and a handheld at the same time. Upon release, it was outsold by the Game Boy Advance 100-1. Not even a month into the system's lifespan, stores such as GameStop and Electronics Boutique were offering the console at $100 less than MSRP, which was $299. The N-Gage did have some big-name titles. Sega specifically seemed to love the N-Gage, putting out a decent number of games on the platform. Nokia touted that 400,000 units were sold in the first 2 weeks, but what they didn't tell people was that it was the number of units shipped to retailers. The actual sales numbers were closer to 5,000. The design was also incredibly clunky. To insert a game, you had to take off the plastic back on the N-Gage and remove the battery. The speaker and microphone were on the side of the device, which made calling on it really weird, and on top of that, there's a rumor that the design was based on a classic internet shock image, a joke design from a disgruntled Nokia employee. The rumor came from the Something Awful forum, so I take it with a grain of salt, but I'd be damned if it's false because it's just too perfect. Everything lines up, and it's just too good to not be true, but I'm waiting on the Snopes article for this to truly decide if it's real or not. The N-Gage lasted 3 years and only sold half of Nokia's expectations, 3 million out of 6 million. What isn't there to say about the Ouya? It's a piece of garbage, it's a pile of shit, it's a horrible game console. The Ouya was one of those crowdfunding success stories, raising $8.5 million through Kickstarter. The company behind Ouya heralded it as being the start of a revolution, and it sure was. The Ouya was the start of the microconsole trend in the mid-2010s, essentially just small game systems that hooked up to your TV and allowed you to play Android games. I'm just gonna lump basically every microconsole in here because while the Ouya is the poster child of these things, the rest of them also failed in one way or another, and they all have very similar stories. These things failed because they're just consoles to play Android games on. The Ouya appealed to people who just really wanted to play Flappy Bird on their TV. Microconsoles essentially failed because they were just Roku's or Apple TVs that put games first and foremost, and they all came with a version of Android, as these were just mobile games on your TV.
What these companies didn't consider is that people don't buy phones just to play mobile games. They install mobile games because they're already on their phone. If I'm on my TV, I would rather have an experience that's suited for my TV. Mobile games are just quick little distractions for when you're on transport or something, and even then, I personally just play Picross and nothing more.
At the end of the day, the Ouya sold roughly 200,000 units and was only discontinued after 2 years. What started out as a CD add-on with Nintendo ended up being this flaming garbage. The CDI was a quote-unquote multimedia platform, not technically a video game system, but was marketed as such. The console is most notorious for its horrible Zelda titles and Hotel Mario, though it did have a plethora of other games that also weren't good. The controller is shaped like a spoon I wouldn't dare to eat soup out of. For being the CDI, it did last a decently long time, pretty much living through most of the 4th and 5th generations. Launched in 1991, discontinued in 1998, this thing moved 570,000 units before going kathunk in a casket. Not the biggest failure, but still, this thing isn't good. The Hyperscan was Mattel's first console since they made the Intellivision in the 2nd generation. This thing was made for kids between the ages of 8 to 13 and looks like those clip art pictures of game consoles you'd see in Google Images. Only 5 games were released, 2 more games were planned for the system but ultimately cancelled due to poor sales, and these games are dated to high hell, having the same quality as those plug-and-play TV games from the same era. Released for only $70 initially, towards the end of its incredibly short life, the console was discounted to only $10, with the games being discounted to just $2. The main gimmick of the console was that the games on the system used RFID cards to select characters within the game. Not only was this completely unnecessary, but also one of the first examples of loot boxes and microtransactions in a way. All the cards needed for the games would be sold in booster pack blind bags, so it wasn't guaranteed you'd have all the characters included. Before the great Hyperscan discount, to get a complete set for just one game, it set you back $100 or more. After that, it was only less than $20 for a complete set, but still, $100 is an egregious price for these kinds of games. Some cards were straight up just never released. Half of the X-Men game, the Pack-In title, was locked behind a paywall that straight up didn't exist due to the cards needed to unlock it being cancelled. The system had bad games, broken controls, and insanely long loading screens. On average, the loading screens went over a minute long. Sometimes multiple loading screens would occur during gameplay. So not only was this thing horrible, it also gave kids gambling addictions and was also basically a plug and play aiming to be an alternative to the big three in the 7th gen. Less than a year after launch, only 10,000 units were sold and the console was discontinued. While the 3DO had a pretty decent library with some stellar third-party games, this thing was just way too damn expensive for anyone to have. Right now, $700 is a bit too much for a game console, while the 3DO had that price tag back in 1993, and the 3DO company just refused to lower that price to something more obtainable. The success of 5th generation consoles led to its demise, as it was very blatantly trying to third-wheel the abusive relationship of the Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo. The system lasted 3 years and sold 2 million units, the best-selling game on the platform being Gex.
And I know, after we talked about the CDI, the Hyperscan, the Gizmondo, you're probably yelling at your screen, Elias, how haven't you talked about the Virtual Boy yet? I know, right? But we just got to that part of the book. God, have some patience.
The Virtual Boy isn't the biggest flop in gaming, but it certainly is the most notorious failure story, especially because it comes from Nintendo. Being marketed as the first console with stereoscopic quote-unquote 3D graphics, the Virtual Boy was a headset that can only play games in red and black. This was supposed to be the parting gift from the late Gunpei Yokoi, a man who shaped Nintendo into what it is today, creating iconic things such as the Game & Watch and the Game Boy. The red and black color palette was there due to health concerns and battery life, a bit of a cocky move after the success of the Game Boy. This thing isn't a handheld or a home console. While it is portable, you'd look like a fucking idiot playing this thing outside. Due to the short lifespan of the system, only 22 games were released and 14 of those were playable in North America. The Virtual Boy also caused headaches and nausea in plenty of people, especially children. It was released in an unfinished state, so Nintendo can put all their efforts into the then upcoming Nintendo 64. The technology was unimpressive, it was priced unnecessarily high, and this thing just didn't do much for people. Though the failure of the Virtual Boy didn't even put a dent in the way Nintendo did things, as they still to this day put innovation before anything else. A failure, sure, but a failure that didn't change Nintendo much, as the Virtual Boy was more so an experiment than anything, released as a holdover before the N64 release so Nintendo could have a 32-bit system under their belt. A year after launch, Nintendo finally released the N64, months after discontinuing the Virtual Boy, which lasted 9 months and sold 770,000 units, making it Nintendo's worst-selling console, and the only Nintendo console to sell less than 1 million units.
And through all of that, I learned a very valuable lesson, and that is, you can't fail harder than the Hyperscan, which is why I'm gonna get into some risky things. Yup, I'm doing hookers and blow tonight, because after all, how can you fail harder than the Gizmondo? Yeah, so I took a cab to get there, and when I told him I want hookers and coke, he took me to a fishing club for soda addicts. Didn't know that was a thing, but that was quite possibly the best experience I'll ever have.